All right. We are officially live. All right. So, hope everybody is doing well today. So, all right, guys, I wanted to go live. So, a few days ago, I made the terrible decision to rank some of the best special operations / special forces units in the world. And apparently, I have now offended Canada, France, Germany, Israel, probably majority of the world, and probably half the United States military. So naturally, we're going to do it again. The comment section, I will have to say the comment section has been completely calm, rational, respectful, maybe minus like one or two, but it is what it is. You're never going to get, there's too many people out there, too many keyboard warriors. Nobody is angry. Nobody thinks I personally insulted their entire country. I think most of everybody has had, most of the comments have been about which units I should include, because obviously I could not do every single unit. I did, I don't know, like 15, 16 units. I'd have to count it. And the video was 2 hours, right? Nobody, you guys aren't going to listen to one of the 3, 4, 5 hour videos. So obviously I'm not going to do every single one. But because everybody wants all these other units, we're definitely going to do a part 2. And we're going to add to this list. We'll go in and we might even do a part 3 to cover some of the more military style units like FBI, HRT, but we'll see. So yes, JTAF2 will definitely be one of the ones the Canadians, you know, I would probably say out of everything, the Canadians were definitely the loudest about the fact that that unit should be located, because it is essentially Canada's tier 1 unit. So, but that's actually why I want to do this live, because today we're talking about rankings. You know, we're going to talk about the ones I already ranked. If anybody has any other ideas or how they think should be ranked, their ideas. If you guys have any questions about how I have ranked them so far, but we are going to go over the units who we're probably going to be going over in part 2. And I'm more than welcome to have a discussion with everybody about what should be included, why. If you guys thought about the different criteria that I've used as far as my analysis and my tier ranking system, that is always up for discussion. So, yeah. Because if you guys want, I can explain some of my decisions. I can go into, no, one second, I don't think it's on right now. Screw with my hearing. I'm going to address some of the biggest disagreements that I've seen in the comments. And most importantly, you guys are going to help me build part 2. What units did I miss? What units deserve to be in part 2? And if there are any units from the original ranking that you think I completely got wrong or you think would adjust it. So let's argue about it respectfully, or at least as respectfully as one can hope to do on the internet as it is. So, so before we get into this, I want to clarify this ranking is based entirely on publicly available information. I'm not confirming nor denying anything based on my previous military experience. I'm not discussing classified capabilities, operations techniques, or anything that could or that shouldn't be discussed publicly. Everything that we talk about today can be researched through publicly available sources. I make sure every time I do this that despite my own knowledge, I do a search on the internet on what's publicly available. I, based on my experience, can sift through the stuff that is or is not true. So that's typically how I do things. That way I stay on the side of publicly available information. So also, this is my ranking. It is subjective. It is subjective to my own experience, my own personal views. There is no FIFA ranking system for special operations unit, right? I didn't number these like this is rank 6 in the world and all these different things. There isn't some international organization keeping official statistics on Delta Force versus SAS. Everybody's got their favorites. We all do. Especially, you know, if you're British, you probably don't want to hear about how the SAS and the SBS and the SRR are so awesome. And they are awesome in their own right. So, but in order to do this, I try to do this from a completely analytical point of view. So I created specific criteria and ranked the units based on those criteria. And a lot of that criteria is based off of my own experience. I tried to go into this from a very unbiased point of view. I was lucky enough to be a member of ISA's tactical detachment, which afforded me the ability to work with majority of units that are on this list and a couple of the ones that are not on this list that will probably be in part 2. And so I saw good things, I saw bad things, and I try to look at it as like, what, with all these units that we've seen, what some do well, what some don't, and kind of base it off of that. Paul Thompson, mindset is all what I want, right? Because that's what it's all about, right? Mindset and how you go across tier listing, everything in the world. Mindset is everything, even going into this video. So let's make an argument. So one of the biggest things people misunderstand was what tiers actually mean. If I put a unit into B tier, that doesn't mean I think they're bad, right? Remember, this tier list is based off the best special operations, and not all of them, but we're essentially ranking the best special operation units in the world. Everybody on this list is already elite. They're already amazing organizations, right? But somebody has to be towards the bottom. Somebody has to be towards the top. That is the matter of opinion. And based off of the experiences and the things that I have personally seen. So, because the fact that even a unit even made this list or is going to make the list in part 2, that is a compliment unto itself, right? Obviously, let's take the French GIGN, all right? I had people saying, how can you rank GIGN that low, or how can you even rank them on the system? Because they're seen as a police organization. All right, first of all, they're actually a military organization. Yes, they do similar things to FBI, HRT, but because they are a larger military organization, they don't have a lot of the same restrictions that domestic counterterrorism and tactical response teams domestically do. So, let's see here. So, because every unit is different, and granted, I wanted to have a level of different styles of units within this list, because we're not just ranking shooters. We're not just ranking counterterrorism units, right? Special Forces has a completely different job than the Rangers, and they have a different job than Delta Force. Everybody does their own thing. That does not mean that they can't be rated, right? So that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring in the French GIGN, because they have a completely different job than all the other military units within this, right? And that's why we talk about Sayeret, Matkal, and even the SRR. So that is one of the reasons why I added them. I knew that I couldn't have every organization on this list, but I'm glad that everybody really took to this video really well, and as many people have already asked for part 2, and I really appreciate everybody that has already asked for it. So in the comments, type in, what type of unit you'd like to see in part 2, and I will definitely do as many as I can. And if there's enough demand for more units to be done and be added to this list in this criteria that I have created, we can even do a part 3, or as many parts as we need to in order to add this list. And we're going to use the same list. So when we add people from part 2 and part 3, and so to speak, we're going to continue to add them to this tier, the one we've already done. So, but remember, we're not comparing Formula 1 cars to other Formula 1 cars. Like, every organization is different. So, obviously I came up with this criteria in order to analyze the units as best as I could while comparing them, considering they do different missions. They have different circumstances. Each government has different funding, even within their governments, how they do things differently, how British handle their intelligence services the way the United States and JSOC handle their intelligence services. U.S. intelligence services and units like to build organizations that have many capabilities organically. They may be able to focus, but they can do a lot, and there's a lot of redundancy. There's a lot of bleed over. British intelligence services and a lot of units have their left and right limits. That's your job. This is my job. We don't cover that. That's not how it works in the United States. Plus, we have more funding, so we're able to do it. So one of the chat questions was, do people judge special operations rankings emotionally based on their country? because after reading my comments, I think I already know the answer to this. So how I rank the units. So remember, my criteria are training and individual operator skill level, mission authorities, right? Because if your country in that unit doesn't have the really authorities, it doesn't matter how elite you are if you don't ever do anything, right? So that is definitely a factor taken into it. Their overall operational effectiveness, which has a number of factors into itself. Funding, right? And being a member of the American Special Operations Community and then working with other foreign special operations communities, I can tell you that funding is a way bigger factor than most people think. And you experience that when, especially when foreign special operations work with Americans, you know what I'm talking about. It makes such a huge difference that even while at the individual operator skill level, the unit itself may not be able to do as much or to higher quality just because they don't have the resources to do it. So that's a big thing, which then really usually goes into the next part, which is equipment and technology. The higher funding, usually the better equipment and technology you have. And then also more money can drive more innovation. So, and then the last two parts is adaptability. Because the best units, because special operations have now been around for a long time, especially even at the tier 1 level since the 80s, with the British SAS, you know, being essentially the father, the grandfather of all tier 1 units. Adaptability is so huge because even DEVGRU and SEAL Team 6, SEAL Team 6 and Delta have changed the way they do CQB because they've had to adapt to the way that the forces that we go against counter to us. So we have to counter to them. So adaptability is a huge part, is a continuing success. So everybody on this list, I guarantee you in 10, 20 years, this list is going to be different, right? Depending on how well each one of these units adapts. And then the last part is organizational culture. Organizational culture is a huge issue, right? Or it's not necessarily a huge issue, but it is a huge attribute to success. Because if you have a toxic culture, your unit is not going to progress as well as a unit that has an organizational culture that is more positive and more professional and more mature, right? Because you would be surprised how much that one matters. And that success over time in the next 10 or 20 years, organizational culture will be a huge factor within that. All right. So let's continue. Because you gotta remember when I'll get to the questions in here in a second. The battlefield changes, technology changes, intelligence changes, and the enemy changes, right? The enemy understands our capabilities. They've seen it. They obviously have to adapt, and then we have to adapt to them. This is a constant cat and mouse, back and forth, and this is never going to stop. This has been going on throughout the history of the world, right? And military forces, and especially nowadays, counterterrorism is definitely a cat and mouse game that, you know, didn't exist, you know, really on the scale that it did, you know, World War II, and really just terrorism really kind of broke out, exploded. And obviously you argued earlier, but like the 70s and the 80s, and it's only just become one of the biggest issue that our militaries have to deal with, which is why counterterrorism has become such a huge part of special operations, especially at the tier 1 level. So, because a unit that dominated 20 years ago isn't automatically dominant today, because legacy matters, history matters. But I'm ranking current organizational I'm ranking current organization capability, not ranking who had the coolest operation in 1980, right? Or who was the coolest at the beginning of the GWAT, the Global War on Terrorism, right? So what criterion did I miss, right? So here's a chat question for you guys. Which criterion may I have missed? If you guys think I should have added another criteria into my analysis, let me know. And if you had to remove one of my criteria, which one would you remove? So feel free to do that. All right, so let's get into some questions before we get to the next part. Biggie Johns, 71% of the earth is covered by water. Much respect for Army, but water training is a different beast. You are not wrong. If you ask anybody in Special Forces or Army Special Forces, the Green Berets, what is the hardest school in all of the Special Forces, is Special Forces Dive School. And I've heard this from everybody, including my brother, who is a Green Beret captain, who was a captain of a dive team in First Group, and been to almost every school that Special Forces can go to. And he still to this day, his dive school for SF was the hardest school he ever had to go to, because so you're right. Water is a different beast for a lot of different reasons. Water competency, water confidence. Yeah, it screws with you when you think your body's telling you might drown. The Norwegian Frogman Corps. So we're definitely going to cover Norwegian Special Operations, for a number of different reasons. I've actually worked with Norwegian Special Operations. And I think in respect to their amazing run in the World Cup, we gotta show love to some Norway, right? Also because I actually did work with them, and I actually found the Norwegian Special Operations community to be pretty awesome for considering how small of a country they are. You got RRC B+. No, I have 75th Ranger Regiment B+. RRC is the 75th Ranger. You can't really see the tab, but it says Special Mission. It says SMB, which I think is Special Missions Battalion. The one next to, in the A+, that's the logo that I used for RRC. So normal Rangers are B+. RRC is actually A+. So I hope that helps, Rack Shadow. JTF2 is very toxic, looks Dallas Alexander, JTF2 Sniper Saga. Yes. So one of the things that when I do cover JTF2 is JTF2 suffers from a lot of the same problems that both the Australian and the British SAS does. They suffer from funding in comparison to the British or the US Tier 1, but they also have a bunch of cultural and organizational problems going on within their special operations community right now. And they're honestly going through a lot of problems that the British and the Australian SAS are going through right now. Pinky John, early Holland is his own corp. Yes, if he was to go on this list, he would 100% BS+. And honestly, I think that Delta Force should recruit Erling Holland. That's just, I could be biased. I think that's what should be done. He might be a huge target, and it is an issue. I will tell you, anybody who thinks that Tier 1 special operators are like 6'2", like my size or larger, they're not. Most of them are like 5'9", 5'10", and definitely the larger you are, actually the harder it is, because you are a bigger target, and there are spaces and going over walls and other sort of acrobatic things that you have to do in all your kit with all your gear. It doesn't help you to be big. It's actually better to be slightly smaller. Only 5 things are important to rank units' capability: budget, experience, logistics, air support, and the last one is intelligence. I think it's a valid question. I'm not disagreeing, but I just decided I think there's a lot of subsets within those 5 that you just named that I think are also important. But I think the one that you're not covering is the organizational stability, the culture, because when you have a unit, let's just say like the British SAS and the Australian SAS, who are literally being persecuted by their own governments right now for things that they did on missions that they were sent to by their government, why would you morale within these units is definitely a factor. It definitely affects effectiveness. And if you are in a unit that's really being a witch hunt is against you for orders that you took from your own country, it definitely has a bit of an effect. And then also, you've heard me talk about this before, and many times, even within the American Tier 1 units, there's definitely some units that are more toxic than others, right? And then when they have a toxic unit, that does affect overall effectiveness on missions. This does happen. Mistakes do happen, and culture is definitely a huge part of that. 75th RRD or RRC is becoming TF Red for 15 plus years as an example of that change over time. Back in my days, 80s, they were Rangers and Black Berets, scary but different. Yeah, a lot of these organizations have changed, even in the last like 20 years. So remember, I joined in 2005, and even these units have changed already. Like when I joined, MARSOC didn't even exist. right? They didn't even get stood up until 2006. And ISA, I'll give you an example, was a very different organization in the 80s. ISA was, when it was created, it basically didn't have any adult supervision. It was basically doing everything that Delta Force and CIA wanted to do. And they were just a rogue unit, basically going around like assassins and just killing people everywhere, right? Eventually, ISA had to be brought back in. And then they were reminded that their focus is intelligence first. And they can't just go around the world as a bunch of commandos assassinating people, right? And there's a lot of different factors like this, but this is another example of how these units change, right? ISA is very different than it was 40 years ago. And it's very different than it was 20 years ago. Okay. Dylan Johnson, did you work with SRR in some way? There's one guy on YouTube who's former SRR says he never really worked with foreign use. Yeah, so I never worked with SRR directly. What I did work with was the British SAS, and I did have a interaction with SRR through the British SAS. And so when I say that I basically had a liaison through the British SAS who I met and had some conversations with when dealing with when I was with the British SAS, was essentially my experience, and I learned a lot from him, but I can't say that I worked directly with them based on the current situation, but I definitely got to experience them and also had a conversation about what their limitations were. And this was also a conversation that I had with the limitations with the British SAS. And then I actually got to spend an entire month with the Australian SAS. And one of my favorite times, I actually got to spend an entire month with the Australian Commandos, where I was like the sole American with a group of commandos. And this was during the Cricket World Cup. So they taught me everything about cricket. They taught me about a lot of the culture, about how they like to use the word cunt in all the most positive ways. It's positive connotation. I learned about what you're supposed to do when the song Eagle Rock comes on. And, I got to experience Vegemite and all its awesomeness. So, yeah, going on a bit of a tangent, but. Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, unfortunately, anybody who saw that, if anybody's ever been to Miami and ever tried to play on the East Coast, especially in the Southeast of the United States with the humidity during the summer, it's brutal. I played soccer all the way into college. It was even on a scholarship. So soccer was I wanted to be a professional soccer player. And I know how much East Coast humidity during the summer can sap you of any sort of energy. So it didn't surprise me that he had to be taken out. But also on him that, he took himself out because he wanted somebody with a team with the fresh legs. And so that's also commendable in its own way. If you had to pick a tier 1 operator based purely on their ability to play a pro sport, what would it be? I'll go first. I would pick a pro road cyclist. Yeah, I would probably say most tier 1 operators have amazing endurance, just because they have to be. Football players, American football, when I say this, a lot of them would be really good, I think really good football players, because there's a lot of really nice controlled aggression within those guys who also are really fit and in shape and have a lot of endurance. Rugby might be something they'd be good at if rugby was a bigger sport in the United States. Can I cheat and pick an ultra Ironman athlete? That also might be a thing, just because, your SEALs at DEVGRU, they would probably all be Ironman athletes. Wait, I got to go back to this. Sorry. The Aussie SA, Ben Robert, war crimes, witch hunt for war crimes claims. Yeah. So that, going back to the organizational culture and structure, that is such a huge factor. You guys don't, and I'm not trying to point this out as if you weren't there, you don't understand. But I'm telling you, having that sort of your government coming down on you, or any sort of factor that makes your unit toxic for a certain amount of time, kills morale within that unit, right? And it really does affect missions. You don't think it does, but it does. All right, I love this comment. Where are you putting the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps? Wow. Yes. If there was an F tier, they would probably be in the F tier. Let's just be honest. Do you think it's impossible or highly unlikely to become a tier 1 operator joining the military in your late 20s? No. So one, you can never go directly into a tier 1 unit. So you're going to have to do probably at least 5 years in a normal unit or a tier 2 special operations unit, because you can go directly into the SEALs, you can go directly into the Green Berets, and you can go directly into the Rangers. You go do that for probably about 5 years, and then about that time you'll be in your early 30s, and that's probably the average age of guys who go to Delta selection is probably early 30s. And majority of people in Delta are in their 30s. It's a very mature organization. What's your opinion on a 35 series National Guard jobs? I was looking at 35 human, 35 L counter intel, 35 linguist, or 35 intel analyst to support soft units. Okay, I will tell you, if you are doing a 35 series job, I can tell you the ones that are more of a pitfall. Unfortunately, this will change if I know there's talk of combining the human and the counter intel job, right? Both, as long as they stay separate, I will tell you that counter intel is probably one of the biggest traps, right? Because what they advertise you do as counter intel is not what you do, right? You're not doing counterintelligence, right? Not in the way you think it is. You're doing counterintelligence is you're maybe preparing at a tier 1 unit, a 35 counter intel guy, he's preparing documents for the operators. That's all he does, right? And anybody who's ever been counter intel, I've never met a counter intel guy who actually liked his job when he found out his job, what he actually does. So I would stay away from counter intel. Human, if they were to combine human and counter intel, that would be a more interesting job, because the 35 Mike, which is the human guy, that is technically a better job. But I will tell you how the human world works. There is a pecking order. There's a ladder. So in order to get outside of a major war, like the global war on terrorism, or if we went into some major war, I will tell you right now, as a 35 Mike, you're not really going to do your job. You're never going to get a source, right? Because when human sources need to be used, like when they need to handle someone who can handle sources, they go down a pecking order, right? First is CIA farm trained case officers, right? So if they need more case officers after than that, and they don't, CIA doesn't have enough, and they need help running these sources, then they go to tier 1 farm trained case officers, right? And then only then, if they still have more sources that are needed, then they need more case officers, then they will go down to the tier 2 special operations guys who are trained human to train sources or to handle sources. So if you are a regular Army 35 Mike, you're never really going to do your job. If you want to do humans, I would not go 35 Mike. I would go 18 series. And then once you get in an SF team, they will ask people when you get there, who wants to start going to ASOP, which stands for, I think, Advanced Special Operations. I forget what ASOS stands for, but it's your human training within the Green Beret team. That's going to be your first taste of real human, where you, on deployments, you get to do human, right? 35 Mike, you're not really going to get to do human. I will say, and I'm not to be biased just because I chose it. I was lucky, because the best job in the 35 series is the linguist, because not only do you get a language, which is awesome, there's so many uses for it, you're in signals intelligence, right? And you are considered the collector of signals intelligence. So of that intelligence world, you're sort of the front man, and a lot of organizations still support, but you get to do the most of your job than all these other 35 series jobs. 35 Intel, 35 Fox, which is an all-source intelligence analyst, you're just going to be an analyst, right? You're never in an SF group. You get to I don't know if they give 35 Fox the ability to be a SOD, which is to be attached to the ODAs directly or the SF teams. But a 35 PAW, you will be, right? That's probably the best job in group outside of being a Green Beret. So if you were going to choose a 35 series, I would go linguist because you get so many much better training, including the language. If you want human, go 18 series, go 18 X-ray. Just wondering because 20th Special Forces is based in Alabama. I was wondering if you were trying to support them. Honestly, like if and here's the thing with Special Forces, the National Guard. If you already have a career and have a job and you want to go and go and be a part of SF, it's a great way to do it. But you do have to already have a job. If you don't have a job, National Guard SF is not going to pay you enough, right? You're there for the experience because you don't work enough. You know, you're National Guard 1 weekend a year, 2 weeks every month. Obviously, they do it differently depending on everybody's operational tempo, but you get to do on cool training. You get to learn a lot of cool stuff, and you get to continue your civilian job. And you get to miss out on the worst part of being an SF, which is in garrison. Anybody who's ever been in a Special Forces group, when you're deployed, you're on missions, awesome. It's a great life. But when you're back and you're in garrison, you play fuck games with the Army. And you think if you're in Special Forces, you're not going to have fuck games and all the stupid shit that happens in the Army. No, you still do. And that's the worst part of SF. If you're National Guard SF, you get to avoid it. So my recommendation, anybody wants to go there, either 18 X-ray or be a 35 PAW linguist. Those are the two best jobs in all of SF. Jean-Pierre, just getting in a white side of SOF is an accomplishment in itself, and that's not a guarantee. In fact, I'd be someone's first roadblock to a tier 1 unit. Absolutely. Yeah. If you guys look, I know we talk about tier 2 and tier 1. Dude, tier 2, any job like the special operations, the Navy SEALs, the Green Berets, the Rangers, the MARSOC Raiders, and all these foreign equivalents, right? It is a feat unto itself to even make into these units, right? And they are no less elite than these tier 1 guys, right? It's just another road farther down the line. You got to volunteer again. You just got to go through some harder stuff and you're held to a higher standard, right? That all special operations, all the white side, all the tier 2, whatever you want to call them, they're all awesome. I tell you, I've met some of the most amazing people in white side tier 2 special operations who I probably actually think were better than some of the people that I met in tier 1. We'll just leave it at that. What's your thoughts on the Norwegian Army's Airborne Jaegers and the Army's Special Forces FSK? Eric, I actually am a big fan of them. I was very lucky. I did one operation in my career. I actually wish I had my ring on me. And I absolutely loved working with the Norwegian Special Forces guys. I worked with the Jaegers. I worked with the FSK. And they were awesome. Like some of those professional one of the most professional organizations I've ever worked with. Absolutely loved it. And they actually gave me a gift. And I actually wear it. You'll see me on here. It's actually a ring. And it's actually Nordic Sanskrit. And I'll show it to you one of you guys. It's a ring that I still wear to this day. That was actually given to me by the Norwegian Special Operations guys when I worked for them for this one particular mission. I didn't realize 35 mic now encompasses what used to be 97 echo. Yes, so I did hear that they did incorporate that, which makes sense, right? When you think about the interrogator and the human, it's pretty much the same job. But I also think that to make that MOS better, they should roll the counter intel all into that because it's all kind of the same job, right? You're divvying out too much stuff into 3 separate MOSs, which should all be honestly all one MOS, because that in special operations at tier 2 and tier 1 level, your Green Berets and all your human guys at the tier 2 and tier 1 level, all the human guys, they do all 3 of these jobs all in one person. So I definitely think that they should be all combined. Is there any difference in the human TFO does and the agent handling CIA does? So human TF, so if it is a farm trained TFO case officer, he is very much doing a very similar job to a CAA case officer, but generally he has a better tactical background. So if anybody's ever worked with the CIA, a lot of the CIA case officers are not very tactically savvy. Like, they're case officers in human intelligence at first. They receive some tactical training. They're not there's a reason why when you guys hear about ground branch, SAC, SAC, SSD, whatever acronyms they're calling it, essentially the black ops of the CIA, whatever you want to call it, those are their tactical guys, right? So, and then when CIA case officers go to meet sources, they're accompanied by GRS, which is, I believe it's Global Regional Support, which essentially it's their equivalent to the Department of State's Diplomatic Security Service. It's their tactical escort guys, and they escort their case officers and thing, right? Because being tactical is not the job of the CIA case officer. TFO case officers, they are trained at the farm, the ones that are, they do have that tactical background. So a lot of times they can do jobs where they don't necessarily need GRS to support. So it's probably one difference that they have the ability to do probably over a CA case officer is TFO case officers have a much better tactical background. So in a lot of ways, the ISA is the Army version of CIA. They're kind of like the bridge between the CIA and the Tier 1 units, is probably a way to put it. Well, damn, maybe I should go to SF Guard, then I can't do my job as a 35 series. Do guys balance a career going well that route? So to be National Guard SF, you already need to have a career, but the National Guard SF does a great job of helping you to balance your job in SF as a career and with your civilian career. Because obviously, if you're not successful in your civilian career, you can't be successful in the National Guard SF. So they do a great job of supporting that. In National Guard SF, if you already have a civilian career, I tell you, it's actually a better life than the regular Army SF. And I think anybody who's experienced both will echo that same sentiment. But if I had to choose, right, because I wanted to be an 18X, right? But the only reason I even became a linguist is because I was medically disqualified. And then I got within SF, I became a linguist just to get inside SF and then get a waiver. But unfortunately, I got turned down. Yes, 35 Papa is the outside of 18 series. It is the next best job in group. Yes, so you'll talk to anybody who's successful in their 19th or 20th group. Both organizations do a great job of supporting your civilian career. So, all right, let's continue. All right. So I know a lot of people who have not experienced, who may have just experienced a foreign special operations unit, or maybe have experienced just an American special operations unit. Unless you have worked side by side with American special operations and foreign special operations, you do not realize how big of a difference funding matters. And I know this probably made a few people angry, but funding just matters. It just does. Money buys training. It buys aircraft. It buys intelligence capabilities. It buys technology. It buys, more capable, dedicated support personnel. But more importantly, money buys time to train, time to experiment, time to fail, time to develop capabilities, time to test things that work, things that fail. The United States has an enormous advantage over here. That isn't an insult to the SAS, the Australian SAS, the SASR, the JTF2. It's an economic reality. And that just, anybody who's ever worked, if you're an Australian SAS and British SAS and you've worked alongside the American Tier 1 special operations, you know what I'm talking about. And there's even guys who I know, there's the one British SAS guy who's been on a number of shows who's talked about how big of a difference Delta was compared to the SAS, right? So I know that a lot of people don't want to hear it. And I love the British SAS. I love the Australians, right? I had an amazing time with the SAS in the SASR, but funding, it's huge. I mean, it's what separated us from them. And we owe everything to the British SAS. We do, because they're the reason why we are successful as we are. But because of the way that our governments work, how our funding work, that is when we have been able to start pulling ahead as an organization. I'm not saying the individual operators are any worse. It's just the overall operational effectiveness of those units is such a huge difference is made. I cannot go into this enough. It's huge. It's bigger than most people think it is. All right, we'll continue and then we'll get back to this. So, which then goes into this other thing, which separates a lot of organizations, especially this is probably the most apparent when comparing the United States Special Operations to the British Special Operations in the intelligence communities, is the Americans have a redundancy advantage. British Special Operations and Intelligence Community traditionally have more clear defined organizational roles. They don't share, they have their jobs, they don't really go. It's kind of like Army MOSs. You've got your piece of the pie, I've got my piece of the pie, don't step over my category. That's kind of how they do things, especially on the intelligence side of things in the British intelligence. These American organizations, Special Operations Intelligence Communities, they don't do this. The American system is very different. American Special Operations frequently develop capabilities that technically already exist somewhere else. Look at the CIA. The NSA was designed to be signals intelligence. CIA was designed to be human intelligence. The CIA now has one of the most robust signals capabilities of any intelligence organization. Their department or science and technology is basically a mini NSA, and they do some cutting edge stuff. I'll be completely honest with you, right? So these are all redundancies. And it is this thing within the American Special Operations and intelligence organizations that if we don't have the capability and we have to get it from somewhere else, they will eventually grow it organically, and we have the funding to do it. And that's also another thing that separates the way that we do things, because they want to become self-sufficient. Does it create redundancies? Absolutely. You know, RRC, Delta, SEAL Team 6, they all have intelligence capabilities. They all do covert and clandestine ops now. Is ISA the one who does it the most and it's the primary mission? Yes, but all these other tier 1 organizations, they do it as well. Just like Delta's not the only one who has tactical abilities. RRC does, ISA does. We all share these redundancies. Granted, one is probably the focus and probably one is the leading element, but all these organizations, they want to build the organizations, all the capabilities organically, and they do. And the funding is just there. It's just what happens, especially the tier 1 level of American Special Operations. And so if you have the money to support these redundancies, it can create extremely broad organizational capabilities. Is it economically efficient? Probably not. But you know, what government out there isn't? And obviously we spend, I don't know what the rate is, we spend more money on defense spending in the United States than like the next 13 countries combined, right? It is kind of ridiculous, but it is who we are. But special operations and militaries are not designed around economic efficiency. I know that they try, but they're not, right? They're designed to accomplish missions. And the American Special Operations Intelligence Community will spend as much money, spare no expense as they need to in order to make those capabilities and make it the best that we can, especially when someone like Trump is in office. All right, let's go back to some questions. All right. Let's see. Heisenberg, what's up, man? How many languages do you need to learn as a 35? Well, I studied Spanish and Chinese as a language from undergrad. I would never want to do that again. Cool thing is, if you already speak a language, especially a hard one that's like a Cat 4 like Chinese, you'll show up and you actually might be able to skip the language training. Or what they might do is if you already know Chinese, or they might send you to some just random easy language for 6 months, like Tagalog, or you know, a lot of people, or if you do, if you already know those languages, they might just put you in Spanish, and then you'll have the easiest 6 months of your life. And you basically just to show up to class. And I've seen a couple of people that we literally had Spanish speaking linguists who they sent the Spanish DOI, and they literally they were on vacation for 6